Today, we're going to ask you to forget everything you think you know about muffling, and not just what it does to your drum to muffle it, but what it does to the feel and the pitch of the drum depending on how you choose to muffle it. Since the advent of the drum set, people have been trying to figure out how to manage parts of the sound that they don't like, that don't fit in with the music, and get to the sound that they want, primarily through different kinds of muffling. Whether we're talking felt strips on the bass drum, gaff tape on the snare drum, whatever it is, there are parts of it that we want to manage. What are we doing when we start to manage those things? Today, we're going to talk about a difference that very few people consider when they're getting into muffling, starting with the snare drum. Overarchingly, there are two different ways to muffle a drum head. We are either mass loading the drum head, which is adding mass to it to change the overtones and change the sound, or we're using something pressure-based or restrictive, such as a felt strip or a built-in internal muffler to put pressure on the head rather than adding mass. Now, if you think that these two things are the same, you're wrong, and we're going to show you why. Let's check out the sound of this drum first with a pressure-based muffle added in as we play the drum, and then reverse this and use mass loading with the same demonstration. Now, these are both muffling the sound of the drum, in particular in the overtones, but they are not having the same effect on the overall sound of the drum, particularly because one is adding mass that moves with the drum head, and the other is actually adding pressure, the same as if you pressed into the drum head with your finger to restrict the movement. While both of these methods are muffling overtones, they're actually working in opposite directions, and as a result, giving us an opposite effect in terms of the overall tone and pitch of the drum now. When we say opposite, we don't mean that one's inside the drum and the other one's on the outside. What's actually happening here is when we add mass, we are adding mass to the overall drum head, thus lowering the pitch at a given tension. On the other hand, when we apply pressure and push on the drum head, we are increasing tension rather than adding mass and causing the overall pitch to go up. Conveniently for the demonstration today, the EQ pod that we're using is the same size in terms of surface area as the internal muffler, and I'm also placing it in the exact same location, so the effect is occurring geographically in the exact same spot, so we're not running into any other variables where that's concerned. A facet that we're not diving into today is the idea of asymmetrical versus symmetrical muffling. For instance, the difference between putting a gel in one location versus a ring or something that covers the same area all the way around. Now let's have a listen to the effect of these on the snare drum alone, starting with the internal muffler. The immediate feel here is that we're only losing some of the overtones. There's still a fair amount present. The feel in the center of the drum is a little bit stiffer and a little bit chokier, but the overall experience is that the drum is a bit brighter, it's a bit shorter in sound, the rim shot still sounds pretty good, and we are losing a little bit of some of the overall length of the ring of the overtones, but they're still fairly present. Now, there are a lot of kinds of internal mufflers across many different brands that cover different amounts of surface area and that are engaged in different ways. The Ludwig baseball bat is very old school, pretty original to the start of these kinds of mufflers. There are also external versions of this kind of thing that can be purchased and that clip onto the rim. Doesn't matter what side it's coming from. Any of these things that we're talking about right now are going to put pressure on the head, thus changing its resonance. A key aspect of this style of muffling is that gravity has nothing to do with it. The weight of the muffler has nothing to do with it. The effect is coming from pressure, and that's evidenced when you see this style of muffler on a bass drum, where the muffling is vertical. And it's just all about dialing that pressure into the head to get the effect you want over the course of, twisting a knob or something like that. Now let's flip over to the EQ pod and listen to the mass-loaded version of this drum. This to me sounds fairly expected because different kinds of gels and pods like this are fairly commonplace now. They're used often. In this case, because we're adding more mass, we are lowering the sound of the drum, but on the other hand, this is moving with the head, so the head itself doesn't feel stiffer or particularly choky, while at the same time, we are losing substantially some high end and muffling the sustain of the overtones a lot more. Stick around to the end of the video where we're going to include a back-to-back comparison of all the iterations we're going through today. One nice thing about working with different sorts of pods and gels is that you can use an entire one, you can cut it up into pieces, you can move it around a lot, where an internal muffler tends to be in one spot and you can adjust the pressure, but you can't change the surface area or the orientation of it the way that you can with these sorts of things. Not to mention that if I want 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 of them, I can do that too. Along with that, if we add more mass than one, this is going to continue in that same direction of lowering and lowering and lowering the overall pitch of the head at this given tension because of how much mass we're adding. When it comes to considering which one of these to choose, they really do have a different effect, and I would definitely be going into adjusting the sound of the drum based on what it is that I'm trying to get it to do, rather than running with whatever I think of as normal. When it comes to muffling and adjusting the sound of a snare drum, it seems to me that an awful lot of people have a prescription that they go to, and then they hem and haw about whether or not it's working, rather than considering the possibility that you could try different things to get a better result. When you're dealing with pressure muffling from below or above, you're changing the feel of the drum and you're changing the sound of the drum in terms of its high end. You're pressing into the high end of the drum and bringing everything up while still retaining a really good rim shot sound, which on some gigs might be preferable. On the other hand, if we're adding a lot of mass to the drum, we're slowing everything down, which could be cool if we want a beefier, fatter, slower sound out of the snare drum. And at the end of the day, both of these are fast adjustments that we don't have to necessarily feel like we're stuck with. So they both have their own purposes, but the Venn diagram crossover isn't very big. Let's hear each of these individually, back to back, and then at the end, we'll check out what happens when we put them both together. Surprisingly, the third sound is also a lot of fun. The fact of the matter is, they're not canceling each other out in any way. They are working in opposite directions through differing means, so we are getting a third effect by utilizing this. What that means for us is that if we have the option of an internal muffler and also bring options for mass loading, we have even more choices to choose from, not to mention using them both at the same time if that's what works that day. Having both of these at our disposal means that if we want to get a little bit brighter and tighter and really project articulation, we can go with something on the pressure side of things. If we want to get darker, fatter, warmer, really squash those overtones, we can add mass to the head a little bit or maybe even a lot and go in a really different direction while still getting a more controlled sound. In the end, having both of these options out there means that we can make smart musical choices in the moment that are not permanent or have any kind of consequences to the drum and get to the sound that we need for whatever music it is that we're trying to make. Like most everything we do here, this all just boils down to simple physics. But the fact is, you don't need to understand the literal physics of what's happening here to be able to make a choice that works for you. Experimenting with things like this is simple, easy, inexpensive, and gets you more knowledge about your drum so that you can make choices in the moment and get to the sound that you're looking for.